User administration and the user environment. In this nugget, we're going to look at commands and tools that we use for user administration in Red Hat Linux. I'll first refresh your memory of the basic commands that we learned in the introductory videos for adding and deleting and modifying user accounts, and then we'll look at some graphical user interface tools that do the same thing. And then finally, we'll talk about the user environment, and specifically the bash environment and the configuration files that bash uses to set up your user environment. So let's get to work. Well, let's just start by reviewing some of the commands that we learned back in the introductory videos to do user account management. Alright, so the commands that we learned back then were user add for adding an account, user del for deleting an account, and user mod for modifying an account. And we talked about various options for those commands as well, so that you could use the commands to their fullest potential. Okay, so let me first switch over to be the root user here, and then what I'm going to do is use the user add command. Before I actually add a user with that command, I just want to use the capital D option and hit enter, and to see the various defaults that are used for the user add command. So here it says the default group is 100. The default home directory is /home. So if I add a user account like Annie, for instance, then the home directory for Annie will be /home/Annie. Okay, inactive set to -1 and expire is blank. That means these two fields are not being used. So there is no account expiration by default. The shell by default is the bash shell, and the skeleton directory by default is /etc/skell. And if we do a listing on the /etc/skell directory, you'll see the various files that are in there, and these are all configuration files. The first ones are like bash logout, bash profile, bash rc for the bash shell, and so on. Okay, so these configuration files are put into the user's home directory. When I add the user, these files will be put in there verbatim. Okay, so each of these files has some basic configuration information are useful for a variety of reasons. Those commands you can put into shell scripts, so you can automate the process of adding a whole bunch of users or something like that. Those commands will work even if a windowing system isn't working on your machine. So if X Windows isn't working on your machine right now, you can still do account management with those command line tools, but you will not be able to use these GUIs that I'm showing you if there's no windowing system working on your system. Okay, so that being said, I'm still going to show you these graphical tools because I think they're nice, but keep those other commands sort of fresh in your mind because they are useful in certain situations. Okay, let me show you the first tool here, and that one's a Red Hat config users is how you get to that tool. Okay, and this is going to bring up a window with all the information about the users on the system. Okay, now you can see right now there's only two accounts, the Perry account and the Annie account. You can see the primary group for each of these users is a group by their own name. Remember that Red Hat uses what's called user private groups by default. We've talked about those in the introductory videos, and we'll talk about them more in these videos too, just not right now. Okay, so if I want to add another user to the system using this graphical tool, I just simply go to Add User, click on that, and now I get this dialog box and I just fill this stuff in. Okay, so let's add a new user to my system. Alright, we're going to add, the username is Charles, and the full name is Charles Barkley. Okay. So there's my new user account. I can fill in a password for Charles. And notice it comes up with stars so nobody can see it over my shoulder. The login shell is set to bash. It's going to, this is checked, so it's going to create a home directory named Home Charles. It's going to create a private group for the user Charles, and that's it. Okay, I don't want to specify a user ID manually. I'll just use the next user ID in line, and it should come up to be 502. Since I'm 500 and Annie's 501, Charles should turn out to be 502. Okay, so I'm going to say OK here. And now the user account Charles is created. You can see his full name's Charles Barkley. The home directory is Home Charles. Okay, so that account's been created. More than just this account being created, the same thing, I scroll down, I can see this thing, users and groups. Okay, so I click on that. Now what happens is all the local users on the system are listed here in this interface. Okay, notice how many users are coming up here. And then you scroll down, there's tons and tons of users in addition to the ones that we created, Perry, Annie, and Charles. Okay, so those accounts are what are called normal user accounts. These other accounts that are in here are what are called system user accounts or special user accounts. Anything with a user ID of under 100 is a system user account, and they're not for normal users to log into. They're privileged accounts in some way. Okay, the Red Hat Config Users tool that we just used 2 minutes ago for account management does not display system user accounts by default. It can if you go up under Preferences and set it so that it will display all user accounts on the system. But by default, it only displays the normal user accounts like Perry, Annie, and Charles. Okay, this interface displays them all by default. Alright, so if we want to create a new user, under this whole list of users, there's this link, Create New User. We can go in and create a new user. It brings up another web page. We type in the username. Let's use the username Dennis. The real name is Dennis T. Menace. Okay, and then we set the shell for Dennis. We set it to be bash. The user ID here is automatically set to 503, but we can change it if we want to. The home directory is set to be automatic. It'll be /home/Dennis. Right now the password is set so that no login is allowed, but I can set a password for Dennis so that he can log in. Let me just use that Linux, if I can type, man. Linux is great. Okay, so you can see that's actually formed from the list. So I'm going to use that. And then down here, I can set options for the password. So, you know, an expiration date for the password, the minimum number of days, maximum number of days that the password can be alive, that sort of thing. Then I can set up group membership. So it's by default, it's set up to be the new group with the same name as the user, like it's been for everybody else. And then there's all these secondary groups that we can put Dennis into as well. And then upon creation, it says, do you want to create a home directory? Okay. Do you want to copy files to the home directory, like from Etsy Skell? And then this other thing is a webmin question. Do you want to create the user in other modules as well? So webmin manages all sorts of things. It manages you know, user accounts. It's going to manage web-based, like web servers and the Samba clients and things like that. And if you want to create this user in all those other webmin modules, then you can click yes. We'll just leave that on as yes, and then we'll just click on create to create this user account. We'll talk more about what those other webmin modules are as we move on through the video series. Whenever I show you how to do a particular thing in Linux, I'll also show you how to do the webmin version of that when I think it's useful. Okay, so now here's our local users again listed out in webmin, and now you can see that Dennis has been added with the user ID 503 and his full name Dennis T. Menace. The direct